He never wore ribbons. Never pinned anything to his coat. Just a quiet man with old boots and a lunch pail, who clocked in at the factory gate like any other worker. Most thought he was just tired, a little slow, maybe even forgetful. But then a young Navy SEAL showed up. Fresh uniform, steady walk, sharp eyes. He didn't salute. He didn't ask questions. He just looked at the old man and spoke one name. A code name, a name no one else should have known. And when he said it, the entire break room froze. Because some men don't need medals. Some carry whole missions in silence. And sometimes the loudest thing in the room is what's finally said aloud. If this story already gave you chills, stay with us. Because what happens when a forgotten code name resurfaces is not a memory. It's a reckoning. Subscribe to Endless Stories, where hidden legends are honored, one whisper at a time. They called him Charlie. Not Mr. Watkins. Not Sir. Just Charlie. The old man on second shift who always arrived 10 minutes early and left 10 minutes late. Never saying much beyond a low morning and a tired nod at the punch clock. He wore the same steel-toe boots every day, scuffed and creased like his hands. His jacket had no patches, his cap bore no logos. Just gray fabric and more silence than thread. On cold days, he'd sit near the heater in the break room, sipping black coffee from a tin thermos, never complaining. Never joining in when the younger guys bantered about football scores or weekend plans. Some thought he was slow. A few joked that maybe he'd forgotten where he put his medals. Probably fought in the great nap. They chuckled, slapping vending machines for change. But the foreman knew better. There was something in the way Charlie watched the machines. Like he didn't just understand them, like he predicted them. When gears stalled or belts buckled, it was Charlie they called. Quiet hands. Precise, steady, and always without fanfare. He never asked for credit. He never told stories, just fixed what was broken and went back to silence. No one asked where he learned that kind of precision. No one noticed the faint scar running behind his ear, or how he always sat with his back to the wall, eyes scanning exits without even knowing he was doing it. Until one morning, the rhythm changed. It was a Tuesday, sky pale with February fog. The parking lot was slick, and the usual hum of engines filled the air as workers shuffled toward the building. Charlie was already inside, sipping coffee, glancing once at the old wall clock that always ran 2 minutes fast. Then the door opened, and a man stepped in who didn't belong. Not to the machines, not to the rhythm, not to this town. He was young, maybe 30, in uniform sharp enough to cut silence. Desert marpat, boots polished, name tag tucked cleanly above the heart. His eyes moved with purpose, but it wasn't the kind of purpose that demanded attention. It was the kind that already had it. Everyone looked up. Conversations stalled. Even the microwave's hum seemed to fade. The young man scanned the room once, then walked, deliberately directly to Charlie. He didn't salute. He didn't ask permission. He just stopped 3 feet from the old man, lowered his voice, and said one word. Revenant. That was it. One word. One breath. And the world tilted. Charlie didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just looked up. Eyes the color of worn gravel met the young man's. Then slowly he stood. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady, as though gravity answered him differently. The room held its breath. No one moved. No one understood. But something ancient had shifted. Because in that word, revenant, was not just a call sign. It was a door. A scar reopened. A past summoned. And in the space between them, the air had grown heavy with recognition. The Navy SEAL finally spoke again, his voice low but clear. They said you were a myth, sir. Charlie said nothing. He just nodded once. And somehow that said everything. The break room didn't move. Time itself seemed to stutter, caught between the hum of vending machines and the soundless weight of a name no one else understood. Charlie stood motionless, not in fear, not in surprise, but in something heavier. Something known only to men who've carried missions sealed in vaults and silence. The young SEAL didn't smile, didn't step closer. He stood there like a man before a monument. A few co-workers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. One chuckled, trying to break the air. Charlie, "You got a fan club now?" But Charlie didn't respond. His eyes, clouded by age yet clear with memory, stayed locked on the soldier's face. Then, as if summoned by something deeper than routine, he spoke for the first time in years longer than most had worked there. "They let you use it now?" His voice was gravel, soft but carried an edge, like the sound of boots on broken stone. The SEAL gave a slow nod. "Just once. For you." Charlie didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth shifted, just a twitch, like muscle memory of a time before walls were built behind his eyes. "How many made it back?" The young man's throat tightened. "Two." Charlie's jaw set, a slow nod folding into the silence. Then it worked. No one understood what they were hearing, but the air had changed. It wasn't a reunion. It was a transmission, an encrypted exchange of memory between two men who'd never met but fought in the same ghost war. The foreman stepped in from the hallway, halfway through a coffee stir, confused. "Everything all right here?" The SEAL didn't look away from Charlie. "Sir, may I speak to you outside?" And just like that, Charlie nodded again, placed the thermos down without a sound, and followed the soldier out through the back door, where the parking lot lay soaked from overnight rain and a single black SUV waited, idle, engine whispering. The door shut behind them, but the silence lingered. Inside, no one touched their coffee. Someone whispered, "Revenant? What the hell is that?" Another shrugged. "Sounds like a movie or something." But in the lot, the SEAL opened the rear door, not for Charlie to enter, but to retrieve something. A box, wooden, old, polished but weathered, sealed with brass latches. He held it like it mattered, like it weighed more than wood. Charlie stared at it and said nothing. The SEAL placed it gently on the hood of the SUV, unlatched it slowly, and turned it toward the older man. Inside, beneath layers of dark velvet, lay a single item. Not a medal, not a badge, just a folded flag with a patch on top. The patch was frayed, faded almost to black, but the stitching still told a story. A raven, wings spread, holding a broken clock. Charlie's breath caught, not audibly, but his shoulders told the truth. The SEAL spoke again, this time softer. "We found it in a locker in Morocco. No ID, no record, just this. And a note." Charlie looked up. "A note?" The SEAL nodded, said, "For the one who never came home, but never stopped listening." The wind kicked gently across the lot, pushing cold into the spaces between words. Charlie stepped forward, lifted the patch with both hands, and stared. He wasn't holding fabric. He was holding every name never spoken at a funeral, every mission redacted, every brother lost in places maps don't admit exist. The SEAL stood silent, like a man who'd just returned something sacred, and Charlie, the man without medals, finally let his hand fall gently on the young man's shoulder. No thanks, no speech, just that. A transmission received, a mission complete. The SUV pulled away quietly, as if trying not to disturb whatever ghosts had been stirred in that parking lot, and Charlie stood there long after the taillights faded into the morning fog, still holding the patch in his calloused hands like it could vanish if he let go too soon. The wind tugged gently at the edges of his jacket, but he didn't move, didn't blink. Inside the shop, someone peeked through the blinds, uncertain whether to say anything, whether it was even their place to ask. When Charlie finally turned and walked back inside, the break room hushed without being told. He said nothing, just picked up his thermos, tightened the cap, and left it in his locker. And then, instead of returning to the line, he clocked out. For the first time in 15 years, Charlie left before noon. He walked down the sidewalk like any man his age might, slow but steady, like the street remembered his steps. He didn't take the bus. He didn't ask for a ride. He just walked, holding the patch wrapped in a napkin from the break room, one hand stuffed in his jacket, the other shielding the memory from the wind. 3 blocks later, he stopped in front of a brick building with no sign, just a small brass eagle on the doorframe. Veterans Hall. He hadn't stepped inside in over a decade. Not since the night he'd watched them hand a folded flag to the widow of a man whose name had never made it into the papers. That night, Charlie had sworn never to return. But now something had shifted. Something had been returned to him, and he needed to face it. Inside, the air smelled of varnished wood and quiet. Old photos lined the walls, black and white portraits of young men in uniforms, some smiling, some staring like they already knew what they'd lose. Charlie walked past them without looking, past the front desk, past the old man napping under the TV, and straight into the records room. A younger clerk looked up, startled. "Can I help you, sir?" Charlie didn't stop walking. "I need a file," he said, voice flat but unshaken. "The Revenant dossier. Ghost teams. 79 through 82. The clerk blinked. That's not public record, sir." Charlie stopped, turned. "I'm not the public." The clerk hesitated, unsure whether to protest or obey. But something in the old man's eyes, steady, steel-cold, like the wind hadn't touched him in years, made him reach for a key. "It'll take a minute," the clerk muttered. Charlie waited without a word, watching the dust dance in a shaft of sunlight near the filing cabinets. The box arrived sealed in gray tape and labeled in handwriting long faded. "Revenant? Classified. Return unopened." Charlie took it with both hands. He didn't sit, just opened the lid slowly, like he expected it to scream. Inside were pages, photographs, maps smeared with coffee stains and coated ink, fragments of men and missions erased from every archive but memory. One photo slid out, a younger Charlie standing beside two other men. One wore sunglasses, the other was missing from the waist down, propped up on a crate but still smiling. Charlie stared at it. Then, behind the folder, he found something stranger. A letter, newer, written not in typewriter ink but by hand. The same handwriting from the patchbox. It read, "If you're reading this, the name has been spoken. We never left you, Charlie. We just had to become shadows. But now the lights are changing. And it's time." There was no signature, no sender, just the same old mark, the raven and the broken clock. Charlie folded the letter with both hands. He didn't cry, didn't speak, but inside, something long buried began to rise. Not grief, not regret, but purpose. The kind that doesn't knock. It returns like thunder. He didn't go home. Charlie walked straight past the street where his small apartment stood behind the laundromat, past the diner where the cook never charged him for coffee, past the empty bus stop bench that had held his silence every Thursday for years. The patch was now folded inside his jacket pocket, but it pressed against his chest like a heartbeat that had returned. He didn't need directions. His feet already knew. The address was muscle memory, an old warehouse 3 miles out of town, long boarded up and overgrown with vines, with a rusted sign that once said Rexton Storage now hanging sideways from one bent nail. He hadn't stood in front of this place since the day they told him the unit no longer existed. That day they'd taken his keys, his name, and told him to forget. But the thing they never understood about men like Charlie, he didn't forget. He obeyed. He buried. But forgetting, that wasn't in his bones. He stepped through a side entrance, half hidden behind a broken fence, and the musty dark of the warehouse swallowed him. The air was thick with dust and the scent of old oil. In the far back corner, behind stacks of forgotten crates and a collapsed metal shelf, was what he came for. A floor panel, painted over, sealed with rubber, invisible to anyone who didn't already know it existed. Charlie knelt, slower than he once did, but still with hands that remembered precision. He lifted the edge, peeled back layers, and there it was. A locker, standard military issue, locked, scratched, but still whole. His fingers hesitated just once. Then he drew out the old key, thin, rusted, tucked behind the patch. To fit. The click of the lock was soft, like a breath exhaled after too many years. Inside the locker was a duffel bag, black, heavy, folded with the kind of discipline that never unlearns. And underneath it, a sealed envelope marked with a single word, activate. He didn't open it yet. He sat down on the concrete floor, bag across his knees, the envelope resting on top, and he let the memories in. All of them. The mission in Laos, the fire team extraction in Marawi, the rendezvous in Dakar that never made it past midnight. All of it. He could still hear the codes in his ear, the chopper blades chopping against silence, the breathless pauses when they waited to see if they'd been found. They had always said ghosts don't retire. They vanish. But Charlie was tired of vanishing. He opened the envelope. Inside was a burner phone. No number. Just a single message waiting on the screen. Protocol Bravo 4 in effect. Confirm status. His thumb hovered over the reply button. No instructions. No questions. Just the kind of message meant for someone who didn't need to be told what it meant. He typed, Unit acknowledged. Solo survivor confirmed. Standing by. Seconds passed. Then another message came. Navy SEAL extraction inbound. Do not engage. Observe and confirm target movement. Package en route. Charlie closed the phone. He knew what it meant. Somewhere, someone had triggered the old world to start spinning again. The patch had spoken. The name had been heard. And now the mission, the one they all thought had died with the silence, was coming back to life. He rose, slower this time, but with a steadiness that hadn't been seen in him in years. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car passed without noticing the old man stepping from shadows. But from that moment forward, Charlie was no longer just a factory worker, no longer a shadow. He was a ghost walking back into the light. And the world, whether it wanted to or not, was about to remember. They met at dawn. Not by choice, but because certain rendezvous were never meant to happen under the sun. The warehouse was gone, torched in what the authorities later called an electrical fire. Though no one could explain how a building with no power supply erupted in such calculated fury. Charlie had been 2 blocks away when the first plume of smoke rose. He didn't flinch. He didn't run. He simply turned and walked, slow and invisible, back to the riverbank where the world still spun like nothing had changed. But everything had. He knew the protocols. Once Bravo 4 was live, everything went silent. Memories became liabilities. Names became codes. And old men like him became necessary again. That's why, when the black SUV stopped at the edge of the river park, he didn't hesitate. The man who stepped out was younger. Early 30s, sharp build, short-cropped hair, calm face. No insignia, no introduction. But Charlie saw it right away in the way he moved, in the way he scanned without looking like he was scanning.
Cell.
Not just enlisted either. This one had been in, deep, probably held rank too. The young man approached slowly, nodding once like he was greeting someone at a gravesite. He didn't salute, just spoke, Echo 1. You remember Havana? Charlie's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Just enough to show the old reflexes hadn't rusted. Havana was wet, he said. And loud. The young man's eyes softened for half a second. Then we're good. They sat, side by side, on the old wooden bench facing the river. Charlie didn't speak first. The younger man reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin envelope, thick with folded pages. It's all in here, he said, placing it between them. There's a name we need confirmed. Someone's trying to sell the Ghost Protocol. And they've already used your codename twice in the last 3 days. Charlie didn't touch the envelope. Why me? The SEAL paused. Because when your name came up, half our boardroom didn't know it. The other half stood up. Charlie let that sink in. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy like fog before a storm. Finally, he reached out and took the envelope. Flipped it. No markings. No blood. Just clean white paper and whatever truth was buried inside. You've got 2 hours, the SEAL said. After that, they scrub everything. We won't be able to touch it again. Who's watching me? Charlie asked. The man looked forward, eyes narrowing at the sunrise. Everyone. And no one. We're not the only ones trying to wake up the old files. But only one of us came with your patch. Charlie nodded once. Then, almost like a whisper from another life, he asked, What's your name, son? The SEAL hesitated, then offered, I go by Bishop now. That's not your name, Charlie replied. No, the SEAL agreed. But it's the only one they'll let me keep. They rose without fanfare. Charlie slid the envelope into the inner pocket of his jacket. already knowing the weight wouldn't let him sleep tonight. Bishop turned to leave, but before he did, he said quietly, "Sir, when I was 10, my dad told me about a man who got 27 hostages out of a jungle no one could even find on the map. He said the man never got a medal, never got a name, just walked away." Charlie didn't turn. "Your dad talked too much." "Maybe," Bishop said, already halfway to the SUV. "But he never lied. And then he was gone." The bench felt colder now. But Charlie remained. For the first time in years, the wind wasn't just brushing his skin. It was speaking. And what it said was clear. "You've been remembered. Now you're being called." The hall was packed. Not with generals or press or high-ranking officials, but with ordinary people, factory workers, grocery clerks, night shift janitors. They'd come for the community briefing on workplace preparedness. A routine event, usually dull, but this one buzzed with tension. Ever since the warehouse fire, rumors had swirled. About strange visitors, old government vans, black-suited men watching from the parking lot. None of it made sense. Until today. A podium had been set at the front of the hall, beneath an American flag and a row of faded banners from forgotten civic groups. The mayor stood beside it, nervously flipping through cue cards, unaware that he'd be completely irrelevant by the end of the hour. Charlie sat near the back. Same boots, same coat.
No medals.
Nothing but the quiet weight of something bigger than everyone else in the room. Bishop had told him the name would be spoken today. Not in secret, not behind a burner phone, but here, in public, under fluorescent lights and stale coffee breath. At exactly 10 a.m., a man stepped on stage. Not Bishop. Taller, broader, wearing civilian clothes that couldn't hide a military posture honed by decades. He scanned the crowd once, didn't smile, just leaned into the microphone and began. "Some of you might have heard the stories, maybe even laughed at them, that there's a man in this town who once pulled 27 civilians out of an enemy stronghold with no air support. That he went ghost right after. That he never took a ribbon, never gave an interview, never showed his face again." Murmurs rose. Heads turned. The man continued. "Well, I'm here to tell you, it's not a story. And he's here." Silence. The kind that slices through a room. And then he said it. 2 words. A code name. Not a rank, not a full name. Just 2 syllables that hadn't been spoken aloud in over 30 years. And when they hit the air, it was like the ceiling had dropped 6 inches. People stopped breathing. Charlie didn't move, but his eyes lifted, slowly, as if some switch had turned the world back on. The man on stage looked directly at him now. "Sir, on behalf of every SEAL who ever trained in shadows, of every mission that was never declassified, of every operative who survived because you existed, we thank you." Bishop appeared beside the stage, no longer hidden. He was in uniform this time, full dress. He stepped forward, walked down the aisle without hesitation, and as the room parted for him, he stopped in front of Charlie and bowed his head. Not a nod, not a token, a full bow, hands behind his back, eyes closed, the kind of respect you can't teach in any academy. The hall remained frozen. Even the mayor stood silent, cue cards forgotten. Charlie rose, slowly, boots creaking. He looked at Bishop, then the man on stage, then the room. No speeches, no grand salute, just 3 words. "I still remember." And with that he turned and walked out, into the morning, into history, because some legends aren't written on medals. They're carried in the silence of those who know and finally choose to speak. Thank you for watching. Not all heroes wear medals. Some just wear time on their faces, silence in their footsteps, and stories that only resurface when someone finally remembers. If this story moved you even just a little, consider sharing it with someone who still believes in quiet courage. Subscribe to Endless Stories, where forgotten names find their voice again, and where truth is honored, one whisper at a time.